Good afternoon. This is a Devar Torah for Shabbat Shel Pesach, the seventh day of Passover, which this year, very unusually, won't happen again for another 20 years, coincides with Shabbat, and therefore there is no weekly parsha because we're reading the special Torah reading for the seventh day of Pesach. On that day, the major event it was the crossing of the Reed Sea, in the Yam Suf, incorrectly translated as the Red Sea. It's not the Red Sea we know of today. In any event, um, that's where we crossed the sea. It split into 12 channels miraculously. And we went through all night, guided by the column of fire. In the daytime, the Egyptians tried, after we got out there, tried to follow us singing, and they were all miraculously drowned. And there was 10 plagues there, which I'll be discussing. We know the 10 plagues in the Yam Suf, in Egypt. 10 plagues in the Yam Suf are a little less common. In any event, what I'd like to do is connect this to something in the Haggadah that we said on Seder night, and it's a Mechilta. It's from Mechilta. It's a Lachim Midrashim Mechilta Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the one who also wrote the Zohar, and it says you can find it in your Haggadah right after the 10 plagues and the listing of the abbreviation by Rav Yehuda. And I'm going to read in English for, convenience sake, make it easier, lengthwise, and you can follow it in the Hebrew, in the Haggadah. And Rav Yossi Hagalili said, how can one show following the 10 plagues itself in Egypt, the Egyptians were smitten with 50 plagues at the Reed Sea? One of the plagues in Egypt, it is said, the astrologer said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. While at the Red Sea, and Israel saw the strong hand which Hashem had shown against Egypt, and the people feared Hashem and believed in Hashem and his servant Moshe. If one finger in God in Egypt caused 10 plagues, may assume from this that the whole hand of God, which is 5 fingers, at the Reed Sea commanded, caused 50 plagues. Now, Rav Eliezer, the second opinion, how can one show that every plague which the Holy One, blessed be He, brought in Egypt upon the Egyptians was fourfold? In other words, in character. For it is said, he's quoting a pasuk in Tehillim, Psalms, chapter 78, verse 49. For it is said, he sent against the Egyptians in his burning anger, wrath, indignation, and messengers of trouble. Messengers of evil, excuse me. This may interpret that each plague descended with wrath, 1, indignation, 2, trouble, 3, and the sending of messengers of evil, 4. If then the Egyptians in Egypt were stricken with 10 fourfold plagues, making 40, then following the earlier interpretation at the Reed Sea, they suffered 200. In other words, 40 times 5. Rabbi Akiva said in a similar fashion, you can show that every plague in which the Holy One, blessed be He, brought in Egypt upon the Egyptians were 5 plagues. Fivefold in character. Interpret the verse to say, same verse to say, he sinned against the Egyptians his burning anger. That was 1. 2, wrath. 3, indignation. 4, trouble. And 5, the messengers of evil. Thus, if the Egyptians in Egypt were stricken with tenfold, 10 fivefold plagues, making 50, then at the Reed Sea they suffered 250 plagues. In other words, I'm adding 50 times 5, which is 250. Now, I want to explore this Brisa Kilta in more depth. It is apropos both to the Seder and the seventh day, because it's talking about the number of plagues at the Yom Suf. And number of questions I'm going to be asking here. Number one, there's a contradiction there's two primary sources of number of plagues. One is in the fifth chapter of Pirkei Avos, which states in part there were 10 plagues in Egypt, and 10 at the Yam Suf, the Reed Sea. Now the second one opinion, as I explained, is the Broisa, the Makilta of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Now there seems to be a contradiction between the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos and the opinion of Rabbi Akiva and the Broisa. In other words, 10 plagues at the Yam Suf versus 250 and 50 plagues in Egypt, as opposed to 10 in Mitzrayim. Now, Mishnah is a stam Mishnah. It states there was 10 in each place, which means that the author is Rabbi Meir and his student, his teacher is Rabbi Akiva, his Rebbe. That being the case, how can he argue how can it be an argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva? He has to follow his teacher's opinion. Now, as I said, the Mishnah in both, if you total the number of plagues, it's 10 in Egypt and 10 in Yam Suf. The Reed Sea, that makes 20. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's 50 plus 250. That's one question. Also, a question: what is the nature of the plagues that occurred in the Yam Suf? We know very well from the Chumash, from the book of Shmos, what the 10 are. We know it from our Agada, which we cited a few days ago. Now, question 2. All three opinions in the Broisa agree that there were 5 plagues, as many plagues of the Yom Suf that they were in Mitzrayim. What's the reason for this? Besides the interpretation of the verses. 5. Rabbi Akiva says that each plague in Mitzrayim was actually 5 plagues. And Rabbi Eliezer says there were only 4. Each one was 4. So my question is, what are they arguing? What was the nature of the dispute and its underlying significance? I know they explained the verse differently, but they only did that because they were trying to teach something different. Each one was trying to teach something differently. And then I have a final question. Rav Gossi Agalili does not multiply the number of plagues. In Mitzrayim, but keep to the 10. Why does he disagree with both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer? He knew about that verse in Psalms. Now, I'd first like to define the 10 plagues in Mitzrayim. Those are well known. Everywhere was read Agada, it's listed. Now, what about the 10 plagues in the Yam Suf? They're not well known at all. They're not specifically referred to in the Chumash. Now, they mentioned Mechilta of Rabbi Ishmael, another halakhic midrash collection, and also Rabbeinu Yonah, a famous Rishon medieval commentator. And here are the 10. Plagues. A, that although the sun arose after the Jews had transversed the Yam Suf, the Egyptians were still kept in darkness by the cloud of glory. The cloud of glory turned the hard ground into clay. In other words, they solidified the ground so the Jews could work along comfortably. And by the way, it's not said in this list. They also made mosaics on the wall if somebody wanted to drink each one of the 12 channels, and all the tribes could see each other. Water came to them, and also there was fruit. And three, the pillar of fire, which guided Jews, sent waves of heat to the Egyptians, causing the hooves in their horses to fall off. The fourth one is the heat burned off the wheels of the chariots, which kept going into the sea. After the horses' hooves fell off, the Egyptians tumbled in the mud and could not get up. The sixth plague, when the water flowed back towards the Egyptians, they couldn't escape because the water came from every direction. Obviously, something only Hashem could accomplish, which goes against the laws of nature. The seventh, the Egyptians were tossed into the sea by Hashem, and they sank. The lower depths sent them back to the upper depths. 8, some of the Egyptians were covered by the mud at the bottom of the sea. 9, depending on their degree of evil, some Egyptians sank like lead and died quickly, and others died slowly and more painfully. And finally, 10, all the bodies of Egyptians were ejected by the Yom Suf, so that the Bnei Israel could see their feared enemies clearly dead. Never have to worry about them again. Now, although the plagues at the Yom Suf were not as well known as those in Mitzrayim, Egypt, they were 5 times the number of plagues at the latter location. And by doing that, what was the result? A concomitant greater revelation of Hashem's power and glory is there as compared to Mitzrayim. While Rav Yossi HaGalili does quote Posukim as a basis for this distinction, does not explain its underlying significance. The transversing of the Yam Suf by Bnei Israel and subsequent Egyptians occurred in the 7th day after the exodus from Egypt. The day became the 7th day of Pesach. That's a tie-in here, the Shabbat Pesach. Each day, and now let's look at this. Each day and period of Jewish year is imbued by Hashem with special qualities, characteristics, as indicated by the fact we have a lunisolar calendar and not one that keeps going back to the same place. This day became the 7th day of Pesach. So there are 2 days of the year which reflect Hashem's open intervention in the world with miracles and wonders, namely the 21st of Nisan, which is the 7th day of Pesach, and the 21st of Tishrei, the 7th day of Sukkot. Now, just to explain why you have 2 different days. In general, Rosh Hashanah, in Gemara Rosh Hashanah, Daf 12b, there was a dispute between Ravi Eliezer and Rav Yeshua, whether the world was created on the 25th of the Hebrew month of Elul, with man being created on the 1st of Tishrei, or was the world created on the 25th of Adar, with man and woman being created on the 1st day of Nisan. Therefore, the 22nd of Nisan is 21 days after the creation of man, 26 days after the creation of the world. Similarly, the 21st of Tishrei is 26 days after the creation of the world and 21 days after the creation of man. As Rabbeinu Bachya explains his book, Kala Kamek, it was a famous Rishon from Spain in the 1300s. The 7th day of Sukkot represents 2 aspects of Hashem. This is very important. One is the Yud K Vav K, which is a gematria 26, and is Hashem's power over the universe, its creation and maintenance. And the Hebrew letters Yud Kaf K Vav, which is gematria 21, and represents Hashem's mastery over mankind's destiny. Applying the explanation by Reino Baki to 7th day of Pesach. In fact, he says when he gets to the 7th day of Pesach, that everything he said about the 7th day of Sukkot applies. So, applying the above explanation of Rabbeinu Bakir's Seventh Day of Pesach is the day of the open revelation of Hashem in the world of man through the use of nature. Since that day is a revelation to the Hashem to the entire world, it follows to be more plagues against Egypt and greater miracles for the Jewish people than in Mitzrayim, which is the case. Our main miracle in Mitzrayim, 10 miracle, was that none of the plagues affected us. There were others too, but that was the main one. Now, this duality of the plagues is representing two aspects of Hashem, is the reasons why they were imposed on Pharaoh and Egyptians. Now, reflecting those reasons, namely that Pharaoh denied Hashem when Moses first came to him, both in his capacity as Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, the creator of the universe, as well as the one who guided mankind. This is seen by Pharaoh's answer to Moshe when he said, I do not recognize Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, thus denying Hashem as the creator of the universe, nor will I let the Jewish people go, reflecting Hashem as control of man. Therefore, the plague sent by Hashem, God, against the Egyptians reflects both these aspects. Now, having established that there were 5 times the number of plagues in the Yam Suf as there were in Yam Suf, what was the nature, and how can these number of plagues ranging 50 to 250 be reconciled with the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which states 10 and 10? There's many different explanations given. One I'm going to go with now, which is based on explanation of Maharil of Prague and Yam Mitzrayim Haggadah, written by Rabbi Isaac Chava, who was a rabbi in the 1700s, who was a student of the Vilna Gaon, Rav Eliyahu of Vilna. Now, they explained that these plagues represent 4 spiritual elements which Hashem created the universe, namely spiritual Afar, earth, spiritual Aish, fire, spiritual Mayim, water, and spiritual Ruach, which is air, as well as the ethereal unifying underlying uniform force called Helios, a term of the Rambam. I believe it is derived from the Greek, the word, not the concept. Therefore, each of these numerous plagues represent one of these 5 spiritual elements. The 10 plagues mentioned in Pirkei Avos are the general plagues, and these plagues are their subcomponents. Now, let's go try to answer the other questions. Both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer discussed the number of plagues in Mitzrayim, disagree if each of these plagues in Mitzrayim is really 4 or 5 plagues. Now, they split up the verse differently, but that's not the real reason. On a deeper level, the true dispute is whether Hashem is responding to Pharaoh by sending plagues representing the 4 spiritual elements I just described, or as Rabbi Akiva says, that since Pharaoh is also denying the essential unity of creation, represented by the 5th element, Helio, so he said there should be a 5th punishment for each one, therefore a 5th sub-plague. Rav Yossi HaGalili does not use the plain pasuk in assembly, says there were 10 plagues in Mitzrayim. Now, what's one possible explanation of this dispute? Rabbi Yossi on the Galili on one hand, and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer on the hand can be explained as follows. Rav Yossi holds that the Hashem's main purpose in Mitzrayim was to demonstrate his control of nature and to liberate the Jewish people. Now, when the first plague started a year before they were actually in the first Pesach, all slavery stopped, but their actual freedom, the Jewish people did not occur to the first Pesach night. Anyway, left. Now, so Rabbi Yossi is holding that way. And the plagues of the Yom Suf had the primary goal of demonstrating to the world that Hashem controls history and the affairs of mankind. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer disagree with Rabbi Yossi's interpretation of the plagues in Mitzrayim. They emphasize the aspect of the punishment of Pharaoh and Egyptians, denial of Hashem's creation of the universe, even at the expense of weakening and demonstration of Hashem's power over man at the Yom Suf. In other words, they blur that distinction. Now, looking at that, hopefully this will give us a new interpretation, not only the plagues which learned about in the Haggadah, but will also give us insights into the seventh day of Pesach. May we all have a Chag Sameach, and since the seventh day is on Shabbat, good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.